Welcome everyone
Yeah.
to Cybersquatch 2021. Hopefully the last Cybersquatch we ever do, because next year should be in person. Woo! So we're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining. I am Beth. I am one of the founders of Swordsquatch, along with Aiden and Lee and Eric. We've been doing this since the beginning. I don't remember when the beginning was, but that's how long we've been doing it. This is Connor. He is from P starting place, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh.
Philadelphia.
Okay, Philadelphia. Yay, over there. So it is much later for him. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited. This is our first time having Connor participate in Swordsquatch, and we're so excited to have him. Them. What are your pronouns?
My pronouns are he, him. I was going to get to those when I did mine.
Yeah, great. Those ones. I got it. And guessed good. So reminder that from our code, Black Lives Matter, be kind to each other, be patient with technical difficulties. And we are broadcasting from Duwamish native lands. These are all very important things. This year we are sponsored by the Purple Heart Armory. I think there is a prize that might be given out at some point. I'm not entirely sure what that entails, but go check out Purple Heart. They have been a really great, consistent supplier of HEMA supplies for many, many years. More on the code. Follow the code. If you don't, we will kick you out, and there will be no. We are going to err on the side of yeeting people quickly because there's not enough time in the day to deal with shit. So we're not gonna. If you need assistance, please ask questions. You can raise. There's like a little button to raise your hand, or there's a chat function that someone has already used. Oh, 2016 is when we started Swordsquatch. But yeah, if you want to, there should be discussion time later on or throughout the thing. So raise your hand and we'll click the button to let you talk. And then I think you have to accept being allowed to talk or something like that. So just pay attention to that bit in the things. And yeah, definitely talk, ask questions. We want this to be really interactive and super fun. So that's it. I'm gonna turn my camera off and let Connor take the reins. Go, go, go.
All right. Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you all of the wonderful folks at Swordsquatch for all that you're doing. I am so excited to be here. And we're gonna kick off the shindig right quick right now. Okay. So today's class is Time to Kill, examining Vadi's mesotempo. Okay. Do. Damn. Can y'all see the PowerPoint? Okay. Okay. All right. Ooh. Chat. Where is chat? Yep. All right. Awesome. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Let's get this shit kicked off. All right. So, Time to Kill, examining Vadi's mesotempo by Kemp-Cowell. Who am I? I am the head instructor of the Philadelphia Common Fencers Guild, based out of Philadelphia, which is on Lenape native lands. So, who am I? Question I ask myself every day, every time I roll out of bed. I've been practicing HEMA for 5 years. I got started in 2016. I've been teaching for 4. That covers Vadi predominantly, Fiore, along with a recent venture into the Bolognese tradition. I've been researching Vadi as my primary source for the past 4 years, and I am an emergency room technician at a level 1 trauma center in North Philly. And I'm also a part-time master of the arcane arts, if you didn't already know that. What are we going to be doing here? Okay, so we're going to learn a smidge about who Vadi was. We're going to discuss the tactics of his system, walk through the technical parts of mesotempo and everything that is involved with that, and explain how to train it. Then we're going to take questions. If you have any questions in the meantime, please use your ability to do the talky thing while we are on there. A bit about me. I like to explain to people that I am a serious martial artist that does not take themselves seriously. So please understand that I'm going to be goofy as shit the entire fucking time we're doing this. All right. So without further ado, let's get ourselves into Vadi land. Why don't we? Okay. So who was this guy? Who was he? Who was he? we don't really know who the fuck he was. There were a bunch of Filippo Vadis during the period that our boy here was active. But to be a bit more specific about our guy, Filippo di Vadi de Pisa was a late 15th century fencing master from Pisa. He wrote his book De Arte Gladiatoria de Bicandi and sent it to the ducal court of Urbino. Why? We presume that it's possibly as a way to land himself a sick gig being a fencing master from one of the most important courts in Italy during the time period. And he's got a lot of really, really cool stuff in there that's kind of been either put to the sidelines or used as like a secondary source of information to bolster the Bolognese tradition or to bolster Fiore. And as such, has kind of landed himself in like this tertiary quaternary position in terms of what modern HEMA is today, with our two big schools of thought being predominantly focused, at least in terms of longsword, on the early Lichtenauer, RDL, Ringig, Danzig, Lev glosses, and Fiore coming in as like a close second or third, and then Meyer with the late 16th century stuff. Okay, so when you think Vadi, think 1480, think that transitional period before we get into the 1500s. Click. Okay, so what do we know? We know that Vadi had some access or initiation to the Armazzari tradition. Like I said, he attempted to land himself a job as a fencing master in the court of Urbino, and he likely spent some time at a university, most likely. Okay, so how do we know that he had some access or some type of connection to the Armazzari tradition? Littered throughout the later sections of Vadi's texts, there's a bunch of stuff that is almost like one for one comparable to Il Fior de Battaglia, the Flower of Battle, which was Fiore's book, right? And there are like this interesting tactical and technical decisions that Vadi likes to make that are very reminiscent of Fiore. But what is also interesting is that there are also the same kind of tidbits with another foot being in the Bolognese tradition of the later parts of the 15th century, right? So he's got himself in this really cool in between position, and it makes for a really, really fucking awesome technical and tactical window, this keyhole that we can look through and use as a way to get good. Okay. So how do we know that he likely spent some time at university? Reading in the early sections of his book, he sounds like a learned man, and he makes a lot of references to specific concepts of Aristotelian physiology. I mean, not physiology. Yeah, bodies, philosophy, and concepts that reference or are akin to what would typically be taken in liberal arts degrees during the time period. But less on that, more on Fanson. Okay, so today, like I talked about in the little doobly-doo for this class, we are going to be talking about mezzotempo. Mezzotempo, mezzotempo, and how to do that and how to identify how to do it. So we're going to be talking about the technique now in broad strokes. Mezzotempo is two things. It is a concept of timing a strike to be in the middle of an opponent's orientation to an exchange or an action, and a specific strike made behind the opponent's sword. It's linked to the concept of rotare, or the rotating principle, along with mesotempo, or half tempo, as the two central techniques and principles of Vadi's system. These are the very core basic mechanics that hold and glue the entire stuff of his art together. Okay. Additionally, we're not going to really go too into detail on the footwork and everything like that. We're just kind of focused on the meat of this. Vadi has this interesting thing where he utilizes very profiled stances and positions in conjunction with more standard guard positions and unique kind of lunge-based footwork to maximize the outcome of getting us into a proper position where we can utilize mesotempo or rotare. Okay, he puts equal emphasis on feints, directs attacks, and probing as methods of initiating the fight. Okay, so how we're going to break this shit down: measure, tactics, technique, and how to train. Everybody following along so far? Got any questions or anything like that before we move on to the next slide? Okay, let's keep on rolling along. Okay, so let's implant a bug here. There are 4 measures, okay? There is out of measure, okay, where you can do anything possible. You can wave your arms around, you can swing your sword in the air. Doesn't matter. You're completely out of measure. Nothing that your opponent do can harm you. Nothing that you can do can harm your opponent. You can even fucking chuck your sword at him. Not going to touch you, okay? The third measure is largo, jogo largo, which is wide measure. So, yeah, so being out of measure. Generally, we consider this being in a place where our opponent has not crossed our sword, and if they do, they're generally crossing us at the tips. You know, whenever you're fencing and your buddy or whoever you're fighting just kind of like sticks their sword out at you, and you're like, oh, I don't like that, and you stick your sword out at them, and you can touch the tips, or you're fencing from your guards, right? We can consider that wide measure, yoga largo. Second measure. Third measure, excuse me, would be mesospada, right? Crossing at the half swords. This is the most important one, okay? This is where all of our shit comes online. This is where Vadi wants us to play from. This is the place where we do all of our really cool, interesting shit from. It's mesospada, okay? That's crossing at the half sword. Not half swording like you're grabbing your blade at the middle, but at half blades, like you're crossing in the middle of each other's blade, okay? Remember, most important one. And then the last one, jogo stretto, which is constrained measure, close measure. A bunch of people have a bunch of different names for this. I'm just going to go with close because it's simple. We all understand what that means. Sound good? Awesome, great, fantastic. Okay, jogo stretto, close measure. Okay, so mesospada, the fourth measure or the third measure. Mesospada, or the half sword, is the bind where all of the most important techniques in Vadi come into play, especially mesotempo. The closest approximation to this in Lichtenauer longsword is Krieg, or Handarbeit, if we're talking Meyer and the later German sources, right? It's that place where you are bound to your opponent's sword, you're in the middle of the shit, you're fighting in the pocket, and everything that you're doing is in a place where you cannot retreat safely from your opponent, okay? And you have to make very specific decisions and complex blade actions to reach the next opening that your opponent has, that you can hit your opponent with. That is where Vadi wants us to fight. And Vadi does not shut the fuck up about it in the entirety of his text. The Bolognese also are all jazzed about it as well to a certain degree, but not as much as Vadi. And Vadi has a lot more of a particular method on how he prefers to fight from the mesospada than the Bolognese. Okay, so we are told to seek this bind out and play from it at every possible chance. The way we're going to do that, we're going to get into in a few minutes. Okay. Said the Bolognese masters hold similar reverence to playing from this measure and how skillful you must be to play from here and all those lovely flowery words. But each has their particular tactics to set them apart from Vadi in terms of play at the mesospada. Any questions before we move on? Oh, okay. All right. So how do we get there? Why do we want to? Okay. So simply put, why do we want to play at this specific place, Connor? Why is Vadi so cool? Why does he like to play from this specific position? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Largo play fucking sucks. Fencing from Largo is dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. Your opponent's sword is unconstrained. You're open to sniping attacks. You're very open to doubles. And the only source of information that you were getting from your opponent is almost strictly visual and based off of kind of what they're giving you and what you're giving them on posture, and what kind of guard they're in, right? These are important things for us to know to progress onwards when we are going to fence at the mesospada, right at the half sword. But we have to make sure that we have some other form of information other than just kind of what we're looking at, right? And your best way to get more info is to bind in some kind of way or to probe your opponent, right? Do some reconnaissance to figure out how you're going to progress to either the hit or to a crossing that will be beneficial for you to land a hit. Okay, so probing with a point forward guard, like thrusting in long point or Spreckfenster or Postalonga, whatever you want to call it, just going like at your opponent, or throwing like jabby cuts, okay, and threatening with the edge. Or a straight up direct attack are easy ways for us to do this. The other thing that's important to remember about Largo and why it sucks is that your opponent can always retreat. You have not constrained them and threatened them enough to, and you are not close enough to where your opponent can't retreat away from you. This is a double-edged sword, right? Because you can also retreat. But if your goal at the end of the day is to try to hit your opponent, doing it from here can be very dicey. Next up, strato play or close play isn't much better. You have to pass through wide measure and mesospada measure to get there, and wrestling can be just as lopsided depending on the opponent. There is always the risk of unexpected shit happening, just like Largo. That being said, Stretto is fucking sick, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You're my child, and you will learn how to wrestle. Let's get to it already. Okay, so like we were saying with those last two things, mesospada constrains yourself and the opponent to a limited number of options that you can both make. And because you are occupying the opponent's sword at a slightly closer measure, the opponent has to address your blade before making any kind of action against you or you against them. And because you are in the bind, you also have a secondary source of information coming to you through tactile feedback, through feeling or fooling, if we're discussing this in terms of German or like common parlance in HEMA at this point, right? Which is why mesospada is so great. We're able to hit and we're able to play at the sword in a way where we are the most safe. This is where the coolest fencing kind of happens, right? And that's why Vadi likes us to play from it, among many other things. Okay, so feeling and perception. All right. The way we work towards our targets and choose our first intention has to be based off of observations, tactile information, not assumptions. To get to mesospada and to get to that ideal timing to hit our opponent, we should always try to stay a step ahead of them and be looking to set ourselves up for a successful bind or position from which we can capitalize on it, right? And the opponent, after being drawn from their guard, right, after pulling them out of Largo with some type of strike or feint or provocation or whatever the case may be, is forced to do much the same as us because they don't want to get fucking hit. But since we know this already, we can use this to our advantage, right? And this kind of idea is very similar to the OODA loop, right? Which was a thing that's based for fighter pilots, right? Jake Norwood talks about this shit a lot, and it's fucking brilliant, which is observe, orient, decide, and act, right? So you observe the situation, you orient yourself to what you want to do, you decide that you're going to do it, and then you progress forward. And this constantly cycles in itself. Okay. Now for body, for body specifically, although this next thing I'm going to show you can generally be kind of applied to most of the other different historical fencing texts, I have specialized this thought process and kind of made my own thing here. Okay. So all of this said, how do we get there? Okay. We got three options. Okay. We can make a direct attack, we can feint, or we can have a provocation. Okay. And each of these have their pros and cons, right? With a direct attack, you get to initiate the action, right? You get to decide what you are going to do, where you're going to throw your cut from, where you're going to throw your thrust from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If the opponent's parry is shit, you just hit them. If they don't parry, you hit them. Great. It's a solid all-around option. You do have the con, though, is that if you have misjudged the measure, or if your opponent has a counter already prepared for you, they can work something against you, right? Feints. This can be as simple as a direct attack to pick out a parry. This can be as simple as a feint where you don't even touch the opponent's blade. You come around the other side, whatever the case may be. Feints are just simply an action that is threatening on your part that provokes a defensive reaction from your opponent, right? And provocation is an action that provokes an offensive reaction from your opponent, right? Provocations let the opponent do all the work for you. They attack you into a place where you are just ready and open to take whatever they got thrown at you. You can cover that shit, and then you can work from mesospada, hopefully, ideally, to the hit or whatever else works best for you, right? If you don't like the parry you get, you can always riposte and then try again. And it's better against aggressive or reactive fencers. Everybody's still on the same page with me here. Backstep OP. Yes, it is. Any questions so far? Everybody picking up what I'm putting down. Hope I'm not going all fucking Pepe Silva on you. All right. Next slide. Okay, so this was that kind of OODA loop thing I was talking about. Okay, so when we come to fence against our opponent in pre-fencing or in out of measure, right? We should kind of be going through this checklist: alignment, assessment, and as a subset of assessment, probing, constrain, hit, and cover. Okay, so alignment. Where is my opponent's sword? Is it high or is it low? Is it in the middle? Is it threatening a cut or is it threatening a thrust? Assessment, which constantly occurs in and out of the bind. You're constantly assessing the situation, right? If you can't get a bead or you need to be absolutely sure, probing is what comes into play, right? Remember, jabbing, shoving the point in their face. Vadi talks about it all the time. A lot of other fencing masters do. Shoving the point directly in their face, being like, hey, what the fuck are you going to do here? Or maybe throwing a quick feinted cut or something along those lines as well. Constraining, right? This is where playing at the mesospada happens, right? We've done our alignment, we've done our assessment, we've figured out how to constrain our opponent's sword, get them at half sword, whether it be through a direct attack, whether that be through a feint, or whether that be through a provocation, and we get our bind. Awesome. Fuck yeah, we're there. Then we get to the hard part, which is the hitting and the covering afterwards. And an important note on covering: covering does not necessarily mean covering with the sword on a retreat. It can also mean covering by moving into strata after you hit the opponent. There is a section in Vadi where he talks about how once you have hit your opponent, that you can then choose whichever strata you wish to finish, which I personally love. So if the situation and the context calls for it, remember that a cover does not necessarily mean retreating under cover of the blade, but it can also mean cover by moving deeper into measure so that your opponent cannot hit you back. Okay, everybody cool on this so far? We got any questions? Okay, awesome, wonderful. Next one. Okay, so tactics. Force the opponent to arrive in mesospada, right? That's the opening goal. Direct attack, feint, provocation. From the bind, assess the situation, right? So where's my sword? Where's my opponent's? Am I on the inside, right? Am I on my dominant side? Or am I on my outside? Forehand, backhand, left or right. I'm a lefty, so all of my shit is flipped around. So where's my sword? Where's my opponent? If I am parried strongly, okay, if I am parried strongly, I will do what is called rotare. If I am parried short or controlled, and I feel like I have the situation where I want it to be, I can do a mesotempo, okay? If I am parried long or I thrust, or I come to the outside line, I can thrust along it, okay? Have they begun prepping another attack? Parry that shit, mesotempo. Are they assessing the bind? You guessed it, you do a fucking mesotempo. Force the opponent to reorient themselves and then smash their genitals, whatever they may have, into the ground. This is the basic kind of thing that Vadi has going for us here. But an important thing to remember, and maybe what you have all assessed so far, is that most first intentions fail. Okay, Vadi seemed to know it. Vadi seemed to know that and be okay with it, and you should too. There's a lot of people who are doing very, very good work with making first intention strikes work, a la Stephen Chaney, doing his ballistic passing step, which is beautiful and wonderful and something that I would highly suggest you looking into. But A little quote from our main man here. Going then to joust at the half sword, as you go more and more to hammer at him, to one side only throw, and to the other side you let your feints go. And as he loses with parrying his line, you can hammer then the other side. Then you can partake of whichever strata or of whatever strata you need to finish. There's that little quote I said earlier, right? Fencing against an opponent and trying to get your first intention strike to land can be a dangerous game, like we talked about already when we were discussing what kind of stuff happens when we're fencing from Largo, right? And so having the mindset of constraining the sword first, and then after we have accomplished that, striking our opponent while they have to assess the situation. Meanwhile, we are assessing the situation as well. In the moment, in the present, while the fight is going down, is probably one of the most critical skills to making sure that when we are fencing, we don't get hit while we hit our opponent. And Vadi cared about that as well. In fact, his solution is using this tactic, right? Is using these tools that we have broken down and then synthesized into this John that we're working with here. Okay, so I said rotare, and I only mentioned that maybe a few times. So let's get to understand what that is. And as I said earlier, rotare and mesotempo are the split cornerstones that make up the entirety of Vadi's art. And it's a very simple concept that many of you probably already do and understand. But when you give specific names to it, you get a bit of analysis paralysis. So we're gonna keep it simple. We're gonna keep it tight. But we're gonna look at a few quotes from the guy here to see what he has to say in his own words. So that you will understand well and use it, reason once that first I describe the rotating principle of the sword. With arms extended go, striking at the edge through the companion. And if you would appear great in the art, you can walk out from guard to guard with a serene and slow hand, with passes that will not be out of the ordinary. Okay, so bunch of cool flowery language from the guy. What we typically expect, right? So what does this all mean? What this means to me, what my interpretation and a few other the handful of other Vadiists there are, is rotare is kind of a description of using weak and strong against our opponent's blade, right? Remember when I said earlier that our response to strong pressure is to use rotare. And that is basically if our opponent is to cut at us or we cut at them and we feel that our presence is weak, we will go into two positions that are in Vadi that can be, if we are to closely approximate them to other systems, ox or finestra, and then do what is called a tramazzone or a wheeling cut from this guard to cut around to the other side, using their strong pressure against us by going weak and striking them to the opposite side. Video. Una memento. I have to figure out how to share a new screen. One moment, friends. So, to give you all a look at what this rotare is like, I have prepared a whole video for you all. Let's see. Can y'all see the new screen? Please let me know. Yes. All right, awesome. Okay, so time to kill, rotare examples. Bam. So. Okay, so as you see here, I threaten my opponent with a probe, right? They cut strongly to my sword, and I turn into this kind of position where my hands are crossed and extended nice and far, right? So I am covering myself by having a lot of my blade extended, okay? And I am yielding to the pressure, and I'm cutting around nice and strong to the other side. And it gets parried because I am a chump. I'm able to cover. And as you can see, if I was a bit closer in measure, right, I might have been able to get that quick little riposte back against them, but I was unable to. Let's look at a few more examples here. So, of note, This is our other guard. The first one that I just showed you was called Posta Sagittaria. This one is, it has a ridiculously long name. Posta de Spada Breve di Longhezza, if I recall correctly. I just shortened it to Breve Longhezza. Okay, so I'm in this guard. I'm threatening with the point to one side. As you can see, I turn into my other position, right? Almost as if you're turning from one ox or one fenestra from one side to the other. And I'm continuously threatening with the point, forcing the opponent to give me a response. At which point, I make that wheeling cut and I deliver the blow to the head. This is footage from a recent tournament I competed at, Steel City Open. I ended up getting 14th. Where I used rotare to great effect against my opponent here. This position is called posta di vera finestra, or vera finestra for short. As you can see, I start in this position where my point is high, my hands are close to my head. I threaten by extending the sword forward into my opponent's blow, and I am able to quickly use his pressure against him and cut around to the arms. But an important thing to note here is, as I said, rotare and mesotempo are two concepts and strikes that are tightly combined together. And as I land this blow, I am able to parry my opponent's second attack, or at least I should have been able to. And then, had he had bound me, quickly strike from there to either the inside of his head or his arms, like so. Okay. So that is that so far. We're going to go back to the slides real quick. Boop. Boop. Okay, so that is rotare in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions about that before we move on? Or do y'all think you got the concept pretty okay? Okay, I see one got it. Yep. Awesome, wonderful, fantastic. Okay, so rotare in and of itself is a very, very simple concept and very, very straightforward to understand. It's just Vadi clouds that shit in incredibly terrible poetry. Incredibly terrible poetry. It's funny. Almost every Italian friend I have that has looked at Vadi has been like, "Oh, this is terrible. He writes like shit." In fact, there is a section of poems that were in a university of some sort that are attributed to Filippo Vadi, and they're all like really sad emo poems. And I remember I was discussing this with a friend who was in the attempt of trying to translate one, and apparently it had the word crying many times over and over in it. But digressions aside, let us continue forward. So why we're all here, mezzotempo. Okay, so as I said earlier, I'm going to restate it. As a concept, it is forcing the opponent to have to reassess their position or direction in the exchange and then striking them in the middle of that time where they have to reassess where they're going. Rotare is great at this because it is quick and it allows us to engage our opponent on the opposite side of wherever their initial attack or parry was. Okay? And because of this, it seamlessly goes hand in hand with the technique and the concept of mesotempo. As a strike, mesotempo is a spectrum of cuts and thrusts done in the timing of mezzotempo behind the opponent's blade. The closest approximation I could come to this, at least in terms of KDF, is duplieren, or winding on the outside line. Okay, and both of these things appear in Vadi, and they have many different setups inside of Vadi. Some of them are very reminiscent to strike-in plays, a la ending section of Ringek, and many places in just in the general duplieren sections of the RDL manuscripts. And the same things kind of appear also in the Bolognese texts. Vadi's particular thing, that winding on the outside line, is very similar to what the Bolognese would call falso impuntanto, okay, if you are familiar with that at all. And it's kind of like a proto concept of it. Vadi doesn't use it necessarily to feint that often. He just describes the action as the ending blow against an opponent, set up in almost the exact same way as he typically sets up mesotempo. So, mesotempo continued. Okay. Conceptually, the action is aided by first intention strikes that occupy the opponent's blade and break their plan / get them out of guard, right? When an opponent is fencing against you in a guard, they are in a very strong and secure position. They know what the fuck they can do from there, right? But once you get them out, you threaten them with that cut, you threaten them with that feint, you move into their measure with a provocation or give them an opening that they cannot refuse. You got them, baby. You can get that mesospada bind, and you can work from there, right? It's all about that assessment, that alignment, that constraint, so you can get to the hit and you can get to the cover. You force the opponent into attacking into an opening that we can constrain them to. Precisely what I already said. So, mechanically, the action is aided by being on the opponent's outside line. So if we're talking in right-handed land, typically this is after we've thrown a reverso or a cut to our left, right? And Vadi typically describes this action as being done on this side, although later he comes back and is like, yeah, you know, doing this on the left side is cool, but you should do it from all over the place, just for good measure. And it is just as easy to do it from the left side as it is to do it from the right. As a lefty, personally, this technique plays so well into all of my game plans defense, because if I end up on my opponent's strong side, right, on their right side, and I'm attacking their inside line, it is incredibly quick and efficient for me to go from this from this crossed position with the wrist to an uncrossed position and then hit behind the sword. The action is also aided by the use of compass steps or offline passes to change the orientation of the fight or the angle of the fight mid-exchange. So by throwing an initial cut with either a lunge or a step of the non-dominant foot, or whichever foot you have forward, off the line, and then passing, and then bringing that foot back so that you reorient like a triangle step or a compass step, you allow yourself to get behind the opponent's cover or initial cover, and you're able to more easily hit that opening with a better way to defend yourself. Okay. The other thing that is aided, that you can aid yourself with mesotempo, is tight parries that are close to the body. Okay. So generally speaking, when I parry, the positions that I use to parry, if I'm going to set myself up for mesotempo, are incredibly close to my body. Okay, my hands are very low. Okay, and they are almost down here, and I'm almost really covering myself just by moving the sword to the left or the right. And in Vadi, these guards are called posta di donna and posta corona, and they correspond with the right being posta di donna and the left being posta corona. I don't really need to do much to set myself up for this. If they throw that cut in and I cover myself right here, my body is mechanically set up that I can easily whack them right behind their sword on either side because of the positioning of my hand and the positioning of my body. We will see more examples of this when we get to the video on mesotempo. The other thing that is aided, mechanically speaking, for mesotempo, it's to our advantage, is strong and wide reactions from the opponent, as well as hands low, point high parries, like I discussed, from them. Something that I do all of the time is if my opponent comes out to bind with me while my point is extended at them or their point is extended at me, is to give them incredibly hard pressure against their sword to ask them for a cut around. Be like, hey, your point's going this way. So I always consider cutting around almost to be a check, as if you would describe in chess, where you have closed off a line against your opponent and you are forcing them to have to re-engage in a different spot of your body. So forcing them to have to cut around from which you can easily parry it and then cut behind their sword. We don't like when our opponent parries in Ox or Finestra or Leoncorno, whatever you want to call it, Becca Posa, Guardia Dentar, so on and so forth. Any questions before I move on to the next slide? I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you really quick. Oh no, I can't see chat. Where did you go? Curious, but you can go on. Why don't you like it when they parry in that high guard? It's because I can't do my thing. It's very difficult for you to cut behind the opponent's sword when they are in a hanging position. If they have parried you in a hanging position, typically what I would do is re-engage with another cut around. The mechanics of the mesotempo don't really allow you to hit behind the opponent's sword when their point is high and threatening you on the center line, if that makes sense. Also, very good question. Also, another very simple response. If they do parry that high, and this is Vadi's canonical counter to if a person parries you in this position, is to just immediately go underneath with a sotano or like a unterhau, okay, underneath to the arms. So if they parry you high like that, you just wham bam underneath to the arms. But that shit's very hard to do safely. At least in modern fencing, but you can get it off. Okay, so videos. Okay, now it's time for mesotempo video. Screen 2. If parrying with low guard, is there a possibility to get the weak of sword broken through, or is that the plan? Okay. If parrying with a low guard. Parrying with a low guard, is there a possibility to get the weak of the sword broken through? Or is that the plan? So typically when you're parrying from a low position, say for example, you're in like Flugish. Okay, all right. So like if they're point forward, are we talking about our opponent is in that position or we're in that position? Mentioning it earlier. Okay, all right. So I get what you mean. I get what you mean. So if we throw if they throw a cut at us, right, and we parry like that really tight parry, we want their sword to go past us so that we're inside of the angle that we can hit them. You're going to see it in this video in just 1 second. I got you. Okay, let me see if I can get this out of potato quality. So as you can see, that is Postadana that the fencer with the silver mesh is in. That's me. Very, very quick. So as you can see, I threaten on the outside, okay? So that my opponent does an instinctively wide action to parry that. And I immediately go to cover their sword. As you can see, I am crossing at the middle of their blade, okay? So that I can then align my true edge to their face and hit them as they are instinctively coming back in. And this is a very tight action. It's very, very simple. Excuse me, I will not use that fucking word. It's very, very small. It's very subtle. As you can see here, I'm making that very, very tight parry close to my body. Okay, and I'm all chambered directly to when I feel that sword contact against my opponent, I can parry it, let them kind of glide their blade further down to my middle, and then I can strike them. If this feinting process that my opponent is going through during the beginning of this engagement continues, my action would be to immediately just shoot the point forward to the face and hit him. But yeah, see, I immediately catch that parry, and their sword is almost directly funneled onto my strong. At which point, I knock them straight on the head. It's a tight cover, okay, but it works. Okay, and this is an example of a counter against a thrust with mesotempo. Mesotempo does not necessarily need to just be that true edge striking behind the opponent's sword. The rules of the specific kind of cuts don't necessarily apply as much to mesotempo as the rest of Vadi's stuff does. He says this later on in his book. So in this one, I cover by raising the blade up and then turning my false edge and striking the opponent on the head by moving into this a position that's called posta frontal. You could also call it Einhorn or left finestra in Fiore. Or don't remember what the Bolognese one is. Sorry. So here we see the use of rotare after a failed attempt at mesotempo. Like I said, these actions cycle into each other very, very quickly and very, very efficiently. Should my strike fail to land after I get it passed, right? Say the opponent's sword raises too high, and I don't feel like I'm going to get anything. The day is not ruined. I can instantly turn into rotare and come along the other side for a 6-6 grapple while showing off some love handles at the same time. And bam. Does Vadi not like the exchange of the points like Fiore? Vadi does have the exchange of the thrusts like in Fiore. It's basically 1-for-1. It is almost the exact same thing in the text. But Vadi does not have it center stage whatsoever in his book. Vadi has the exchange and the break, like in Fiore, but he gives a lot better examples on when to do the break as opposed to the exchange. He just tells you, yeah, and if you want to stab him in the chest, you do the exchange of the thrust, but he doesn't call it the exchange of the thrust. He describes mechanically the entire action of how you're supposed to stab the opponent like you would the exchange of the thrust. But for the break, he tells you that you should do it whenever your opponent is in a low guard. And that low guards are very easy to break. So just beat that shit down. Continuing onward. Okay, so in this one, right? So you see I have that probe. I have walked forward. I've assessed where my opponent's guard. I mean, I've aligned to my opponent's guard. I've threatened them to see what their response is going to be. And they are reacting by defending with distance, right? So then I threaten the other opening by moving already into that position where I will be instantly able to strike the mesotempo as they cover against my sword. And as soon as they give me the pressure, bam, I'm on top of it. I hit them right in the face before they get the chance to even do anything against me. And then I'm out. And I put this one in here specifically because of how quick it is. This is a blink of an eye, you'll miss it. so the next one we are going to be looking at using the point when it comes to doing the mesotempo. Okay, so the procedure is pretty much the same. You saw that there was always an engagement on one line, followed by either a cut around or some type of other disengaging action under or over the blade, at which point you got the bind on the opposite side, and then you cut. The other option is that if your opponent is a bit further away in distance, okay, you can threaten with the point, okay, and you can drive the point in. And in this one, I get conked directly on the head after I land the point, which is why we will talk now about one of the one of the weaknesses of this particular action, right? It's something that we have to worry about. If you don't recover and your opponent parries after you have turned into that position, either ending the cut or even more so thrusting on the outside line, you are incredibly susceptible to your opponent parrying you very wide and you kind of flying off in the opposite direction, at which point you're kind of screwed unless you're able to very quickly turn back into the guard towards their sword, whichever guard, to cover yourself, and then cut around, which would be the proper action if you are parried that way. So basically, if you fuck up, rotare. Simple, easy, effective. Just like so. And this one is done with a disengage underneath of the blade. So, probe to the outside line, get underneath, bind it mesospada, drive the thrust forward, catch him in the face. Okay. Do we have any questions before we continue forward? Does anybody need me to replay anything that we just went over? Fuck yeah, Kevin. Fuck yeah. Okay, so as I said, these are the cornerstones of Vadi's art. These are the central mechanics that make up the entirety of the rest of the system. And they also double as concepts that blend harmoniously into each other. Vadi's ideal play is a rotare to the other side of the bind that is followed by a mezzotempo strike. That is the most artful, the most seasoned of all things in Vadi. Okay, so I can explain this shit to you all day, but how do you fucking learn it? I'm sure that many of you, when you go to your practices after taking a class from an instructor or whether you go to a school or you're going to a class much like this one, or you're at an event and you go see Connor's Vadi Roadshow and you're like, yeah, that shit was cool, but me explaining the concept to you and showing the mechanical aspects of the technique will only get you part of the way there. Getting the action down requires you put the time in to train it right. And that's not just practicing it in a vacuum by going through solo drills and then doing partner drills and then just trying it out in sparring, although that can work, no problem. I know myself personally, it's very easy for me to watch somebody do something on a YouTube video or in fencing and then instantly be able to understand and unpack all of the advanced parts of it and then take that directly into my next tournament or sparring session or what have you, right? But because I want to make sure that y'all are well equipped to take anything that you have here, that you have learned here, and bring it back to your classes, I have included a few friendly sparring games for you all to take with you while moving on forward. Okay, so sparring games plus live drilling plus coach sparring equals the shit. Drilling techniques in a vacuum are helpful, but they won't really necessarily help you learn the tempo and the feeling of the action for sparring and high stress tournament fencing. Sparring games fill this gap in our practice of techniques like mesotempo and rotare perfectly, allowing resistance and clear goals for both partners in the exercise to experiment and figure out how certain concepts and techniques will fit into their fencing in particular. Everybody learns everything their own independent way, and everybody's bodies work different. So this stuff might really come naturally to you, but for another person, it might take a little bit. And having the space that is safe for you to learn freely with each other in this confined, very narrow parametered way of fencing helps you grasp these concepts and grow them in your own way, which is why I have them in here. Okay, so the rotare drill is our first one. Okay, so both fencers start from a middle bind, right? So crossed off at mesospada, and whoever is the coach will give sharp pressure in the bind. The student will turn into one of those two extended guards, breve longhezza or sagittaria, to yield against the opponent's blow and riposte. And the cool thing about drills like this is you can build up an intensity as well. So building from that initial drill, you can start from out of the bind and add a direct attack from the coach. So say, for example, you start off in just like one of these guards, right? And you give yourself a few passes or a few feet of distance. And you have your opponent, you have your coach just throw a cut at you so you can get the chance to practice rotare over and over and over again. Okay, and then you have the coach moves towards the opponent from like a very wide distance, and you have to stay in place. And then you have so that you move towards your coach and you initiate the rotare. And then after that, you build on top of it even more with having lively sparring movement, the way that you move when you fence. And then additionally, you can add afterblow attempts. You can add second intentions. You can change the starting guards. You can have the student initiate with a first intention, like maybe a cut, and then doing a rotare after that. All of that works, and all of that helps you really ground these concepts into what your ideal fencing is. Okay. The next one is one of my personal favorites is the tethered feathers drill. Okay. And it's a competitive drill. Both fencers are trying to achieve the same goal, which is to land a hit. Both fencers are bound at the tips on either the backhand or the forehand side, left or right, okay? And neither fencer is allowed to leave the side of the bind that they start on, and they must keep their back foot planted. If their back foot moves, reset, okay? If a fencer takes a step, reset. If a fencer retreats, reset. If a fencer is inching too close to the opponent in the onset, note that to the fencer and then reset. You're allowed to move the front foot freely, okay? Give yourself some room, but you got to keep that back foot planted. And then what you can do to build on top of that is allow the fencer to leave the bind to whatever side they're bound onto to attack to shallow targets like the forearm, like the hand, etc. And then the last case of this, right, is allow the punishing of super wide parries with cutting around to the other side if your opponent does like just give you some crazy wide strong pressure push away. Okay. And then another thing you can do is that you can add it so that you can then do a mezzo tempo after you cut around to the other side. And in the case of doubles, priority goes to the higher target, who if they hit the head or the top of the head or the neck, or to the fencer who initiated the attack first. Any questions so far? Seems like we're all good. We're going to keep it all moving. Okay, so next one, in and around drill. Okay, it's kind of a build off of finished chicken, if you've ever heard the term. So both fencers start from out of distance and advance towards each other. The attacker's goal, okay, there's a set role, there's attacker, and then there's defender, is to force the defender to parry with some type of attack, right? And then use rotare to cut around to the other side of the head. Defender's goal is to parry all attacks. Both fencers cannot retreat. You're not allowed to take any steps back. If somebody takes a step back, oh, Q&A, boop, boop. Did I say finished chicken? In fact, I did, Lisa. In fact, I did. I'm not going to explain why. Oh, you don't get to see the crab yet. Building up on that, you can allow attacker to hit shallow targets to punish early parries. Then you can allow a defender to attack on preparation as the opponent is moving forward. You can allow the attacker to remise. So I think renew would probably be a better term here. I'm not necessarily up to date on all of my MOF terms, so do not hurt me. Do not hurt me. So allow attacker to renew. So if they do get parried, cut around and then do something else after that. You can then allow defender to riposte, allow defender to counterattack, allow defender to afterblow, so on and so forth, and building towards this natural progression where everything starts to look more and more like lively fencing. Okay, so wrapping it all up, Vadi is built off of these his system is built off of these very, very two basic core tenets that mostly come and are expressed through fencing from an understanding of awareness and presence in the situation and in the fight. Many folks who I've explained this to find it very akin to indes and or within or in between. And there's a cat. I'll show him later. Don't worry. I find it very similar or akin to indes in its description and its application in fencing. And hopefully all of this has brought you to understand what the art is for Vadi better than whatever kind of preconceived notions you kind of brought in here together. One of the things that drove me to understand Vadi as a whole was people telling me that he was a cheap ripoff of Fiore and that there wasn't really anything new there. But there's all this wonderful stuff in all of these sources that kind of get left on the back burner in terms of what is commonly practiced today. And my call to action for you is to look at all that weird shit you got or have heard about, like secondhand or third hand from a person. You never know what you're going to find in there. There's so much to the past that's kind of left behind after it gets translated and thrown up on Wichtenhauer or something along those lines. And don't get me wrong, although I do call my series on Vadi Hipster Longsword, I'm well aware that there are many folks who have studied Vadi and still teach him to this day. I'm not like the only guy that does this, but the more eyes there are on something, the better the outcomes towards building and growing whatever it is you're studying will be. Okay, so if you want to know any more about this shit, my YouTube channel, Sinestra, I have a whole series dedicated specifically to Vadi. I have a Facebook page. It's Connor Kemp-Cowell, Hemaist, where I throw up updates on the videos, and I have like little compilation clips of stuff that I do. If you want to see me goof around and inhale nicotine, my Instagram handle is Swords and Jewels. And thanks for having me, you nerds. I will fight you personally. I will fight you, every single one of you. I'm so thankful to be here. I'm so thankful to be a part of Swordsquatch and to be all a part of this. I wish I could be giving this class in person to all y'all lovely folks. And hopefully, COVID pending, I will be able to get the chance to do that at some point.
Awesome.
And questions.
Ask questions, people.
Ask me questions. Put me to the fire. Also, if there's audio, I'd like to be able to hear people.
Yeah, if you want to ask questions with words, raise your hand, and I will let you do that. Oh wait, I saw it and then it went away. Ah, there we go. Go, Kevin.
Yo, what's up, Kevin?
Hey, it's been a while. So I guess one question I had was one thing I think I did notice you start with first is kind of like this like hands crossed to begin with, onto the onset. And it kind of feels like you're in this like uh uncomfortable position going in and but forcing the opponent to do something and going from there and going into a more comfortable position, if that makes sense, kind of like a chambering sort of thing.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so that is part of the concept.
Yes, that is indeed. Yeah. So like I said earlier on, Vadi talks a lot about like he gets often into his engagements where he does the mesotempo from this position where your wrists are crossed, and going from an uncrossed position to a crossed position is relieving of uncomfortability, but also incredibly strong and quick. So you're able to throw those cuts very and clear that line that your opponent could possibly cover from very efficiently when you do that.
Okay, and then the other one was I think at the beginning you mentioned uh, being more profiled, meaning like basically you want to position yourself such that once they start hitting you, you're basically like shifting from I guess like the outside line on one of their body and then doing a compass step to the other side of the body.
Mhm.
Okay, as opposed to like fighting them square on. I think a lot of fencers kind of have this kind of habit, especially like in the more like piss fighting, right? Like where like people are going like back and forth and like not having the sideline. I think there's not much, I guess, lectures that really talk about like the lateral movement. So that's a pretty good like framework to have, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. So, the cool thing about Vadi's guards is like his like four main ones, all right, are all where your shoulder is facing towards your opponent and you're over here like this. Okay, so you're facing right down the pipe while your sword is up here. So it makes it so that your body is all completely coiled to throw this like cut where you're turning and uncorkscrewing or corkscrewing your body across, and that makes it so that actions where you take a compass step out to the side when you throw a cut are very easy and very powerful to do. Which is one of the reasons why he emphasizes the compass step or like that offline pass.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll give the floor to other people who have questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin. Those are awesome questions. Okay, well, I think that's all. I think that's all they wrote, folks. Thank y'all for listening to me fucking. Oh no, I got two people raising their hands. Oh. Hey, Lisa.
Hi there, Connor. Hey, some friends who are watching this on their TV over Facebook sent me this question I put in the Q&A for you. Does Vadi's tempo differ from any later Italian masters? They're rapier fencers, so that's what's generating their question.
Okay. So this is an interesting one. I should have probably covered this. So in the later rapier sources, mezzotempo is considered a time where you hit your I could be wrong here. I'm not very good with rapier stuff. But mezzotempo is considered a time where you hit your opponent while they're entering measure or like while they're in the can't remember off the top of my head, but it is different, right? And the Bolognese masters and Vadi use specific terminology for mezzotempo that are distinctive from the later rapier masters, right? And Vadi uses the term to describe this action along with the specific tempo, whereas the later rapier masters have a different definition of it. So yes, it is different.
Excellent, thank you.
And it has this associate. So one last little thing, and it has this association with a cut specifically tied to it.
Excellent.
Thanks, Lisa. Do we got anybody else? I believe that is all.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Connor. That was really wonderful, very thorough. and a very excellent PowerPoint to go with it. Thank you everyone for joining in and asking questions and all that. Let me pull out my checklist again, just to make sure that I got everything. Yeah, mostly if you had fun today and enjoyed this and enjoyed and appreciate what Swordsquatch is doing in general, consider donating. PayPal.com/PayPalMe/Swordsquatch is how you would do that. But yeah, you can kick us some money on Swordsquatch. Connor, do you have you said you have a website and a pod and stuff? You plug your things.
I have a YouTube and I have a Facebook page, and I was also gonna throw the links to like the slides and the video that I posted all in the comment section of the live stream on Facebook.
Perfect.
Along with into the Discord channel.
Excellent. Sweet. And then we'll also repost those things when like this video will get edited and put up on YouTube like real quick. Shane's been doing that real fast, and so that will all be available there. Go subscribe to Connor's channel, go subscribe to Swordsquatch. And then the next thing that is happening for Swordsquatchy goodness is we're gonna do a D&D game. It has a title, the Cascadia Force is gonna go do stuff in Forks, Washington. And so you can check that out. Oh, swag, yeah. Thank you, Dave. Lilton pointed out the swag. T-shirts are available on Society 6. You can search for Swordsquatch. The shirts this year are pretty heckin' baller. Also keep an eye out on the page because we might be switching which company we're using for merch. So there will be additional stuff available if you're not finding sizes that you need. Ooh, look at all these helpful people posting things in the chat. Yeah, for the D&D, go to twitch.tv/Swordsquatch to check out that goodness. I'm playing a sorcerer. I'm gonna light everything on fire. I'm real excited.
Fuck yeah.
I think that is it. Well, thank you again, Connor. And I could turn this on and I can wave. So bye. Yay.
Thank you all for having me. Till next time.